Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your lesson on modal scales. Now, sometimes when people start thinking about modes and different kinds of scales, they get a little bit freaked out because it seems like there's a lot to learn and so much to memorize and all these different patterns and shapes, but it really is, it can be a lot easier than all that if you can start making the connections between different kinds of modes and scales. And we're going to talk about that, of course, today, to help get you to really make the connections and make it easy to know what it is we're talking about. So, modes, now it says here, commonly used in jazz harmony, modal scales are a series of 7 different scales, each with their own pattern of whole and half steps. To make them easier to understand, we can relate these patterns to the white notes of the piano and the C major scale. Now, quick review, you know that the major scale goes with no sharps or flats, goes from C to C, and the pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You've seen that back from grade 9, right? And it's that classic major scale sound that you know and love. Okay, but if you were to play these same all the white keys, but instead of going from C to C, you go from another note to its octave, then you're starting to play modes. Actually, the C to C is also a mode. The major scale is one of the 7 modes. The minor scale, the natural minor scale, is another one of the 7 modes that we're going to be learning about. But an easy way to understand how modes work is that they're basically just major scales, but starting on different scale degrees of the major scale. So for the first example here is that if you play all the white notes on a piano, going from D to D, okay, you have a different order of whole and half steps. Now your order of whole and half steps becomes whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. Because you'll notice the half steps are still E to F, B to C, but they're now in different places of the scale because we're going from D to D instead of C to C. So the scale itself is called Dorian mode. All right? It's not a minor scale, it's not a major scale, it's something sort of in between. All right? So, but instead of having to memorize whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, and then for another mode, half, whole, 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 half, instead of remembering all of these different ridiculous patterns, it really can be easier if you think of Dorian mode is just a major scale going from a scale degree 2 to scale degree 2. Okay? So this is a Dorian scale starting on D. Okay? If I had a Dorian scale, an A Dorian scale, right? Let me just zoom into the keyboard here, just to sort of visually explain what's going on. If you think of the word Dorian as scale degree 2, okay? If I want to play a D Dorian scale, I'm going from D to D, but I think of this as scale degree 2. It's scale degree 2 of C major, so I'm going to go from D to D using the key signature of C major. All right? If I were to play an A Dorian scale, going from A to A, being Dorian, I think of this as scale degree 2. So I'm going to go from A to A using the key signature of G major. All right? That's what Dorian is basically all about. It's playing a major scale using scale degree 2 as your starting and ending point. All right? The same principle goes for all the different modes. You have a Phrygian, it looks like an awkward looking word, but Phrygian mode, and that's going from scale degree 3 to scale degree 3. If you wanted to play a Phrygian mode with no sharps or flats, you're going to go from the scale degree 3 of a C major scale. So a Phrygian mode sounds like, it starts with a half step. It sounds like this. All right? the Phrygian mode, always starting on scale degree 3 of the key signature. All right. Next we have Lydian mode. Lydian mode starts on scale degree 4 of a key signature. So if I ask you to play an F Lydian scale, you're going to go from F to F using the key signature of C major. Okay, so an F major scale, an F Lydian scale slightly different sound again. And it's because this pattern of whole and half steps changes with every different mode we're using. The Mixolydian mode is a very, very popular one. It sounds very much like a major scale, like a standard major scale. The only difference is at the very top of the scale, that seventh note sounds a little bit out of place, okay? So notice how it starts just like a major scale. Whole, whole, half, whole, half, whole, okay? So to the very top of the scale where it's different. Here's a G Mixolydian scale, like it shows on the page. Okay, so hopefully to your ears, it sounded like, oh, here comes a basic major scale. You want to hear, right? But you don't get that, you get, okay? And there's the Mixolydian mode. Mixolydian starts on the 5th note of the major scale. So if I ask you to play a G Mixolydian scale, you're going to play a scale from G to G, and think of the note G as scale degree 5 of C major. So we're using the key signature of C major, but playing from G to G. And this principle applies to all scales. So let's say, for example, I asked you to play a C Mixolydian scale. If I wanted you to go from C to C, but in a Mixolydian mode, I then think of the note C as scale degree 5. So what key signature do I have to use? I have to use the key signature of whatever is a perfect fifth down from C. C, B flat, da, da, da. So F. I need to use the key signature of F major, but play from C to C. The key signature of F major has the 1 B flat, so I'll play C to C with B flat. Okay, so C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. That would be a C Mixolydian scale. All right, so that's just an example of how the process sort of works. Okay, the lesson continues on to the next page, so let's head over there. We can carry on with the last of our modes. So we've gone through the basic major scale, starting on scale degree 1. Dorian starts on scale degree 2. Phrygian on 3. Lydian starts on scale degree 4. Mixolydian on 5. The scale that starts on scale degree 6 is called Aeolian mode, and it really is just the natural minor scale. Okay, so an A minor scale, an Aeolian scale is just a natural minor scale going from A to A. You've heard it before. It's your basic natural minor scale. And then following is the last one, starting on the 7th degree of the scale. As you can see here, a B Locrian mode. And it has the weirdest sound. Okay, the reason it has the weirdest sound is because, well, I'll explain it to you in a little while. But basically, there's no perfect fifth in this Locrian mode. The fifth is actually an interval of a diminished fifth from here, from B, 2, 3, 4, 5 to an F. That interval of B to F, B natural to F natural, is a diminished fifth. And it's the only one of our modes that doesn't have an interval of a perfect fifth from the bottom to the fifth note of the scale. So this Locrian scale sounds like this. It's a very, very odd sounding mode, which is also why it's not used all that often when composing music. In a lot of music of all styles, classical as well as folk and country and jazz and bebop and pop music, often the Dorian mode is used. Mixolydian is used a lot. So they're all often used, but Locrian is by far used the least, because it does have a very, very different kind of quality to it. Now, just like all modes, this Locrian mode, for example, you can start it on any note. I mean, a Locrian mode doesn't always have to start on B, right? But again, whatever starting note you play, if you need to play a Locrian scale starting on, I don't know, let's say G, okay, the note G, I need to play a G Locrian mode. Well, think of the note G as scale degree 7 of another key, right? Of another major scale. If G is the seventh note of the scale, of a major scale, then we go up a half step to find that we're actually going to use the key signature of A flat major. Okay, so we're going to play from a scale from G to G, but use the key signature of A flat major, which has 4 sharps. And that would be a G Locrian scale. And so that's how you figure out how to use all these modes. Major scale is on 1, Dorian is 2, Phrygian is 3, etc. Now, these two pages of these 2 lesson pages, the previous one and this one, are all talking about using the key signature of having nothing in it. Okay, so the name of the first mode. Shoot, I don't even know if we said it at the beginning of this lesson. If you look at the previous page, at the top of the page, they looked at the basic major scale from C to C. That's called, you'll see it in there, it's called Ionian. The Ionian mode is just the major scale. Okay, so the exercise they want you to do here is to name each scale, name each mode, okay, starting on the different scale degrees, and then write down the pattern of whole and half steps. We didn't talk about this pattern of whole and half steps, but what you can do is, if you know the pattern of whole and half steps for the major scale, all you have to do is slide them over to get each subsequent mode name, a mode pattern. So, for example, the first one is called Ionian. Okay, I'm just going to get my red pen here. Whoa, and maybe get a smaller size pen would be great. Ionian. Okay, and it's just the major scale. So it's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, with the second mode, it's called Dorian. And it starts on scale degree 2. So it'll start on the note that sits here in the major scale. Okay, are you following me? Hopefully. Okay. So because we're starting at this point in the major scale, our pattern of whole and half steps will be whole, half, whole, 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 half, and then this whole step will be tacked on to the end. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking this whole pattern, moving it left, and whatever's on the left hand side gets pushed to the top. So this pattern of whole and half steps is whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. So hopefully you can see we've taken this and moved it here. And then this guy came around to fill in the end. All right, you're going to do the same thing as you progress down each line. You're going to take whatever's here, move it to the left, take the first interval, and tack it on at the end, because we're actually moving from one scale degree to the next. Okay, so let me just get rid of the arrow here. Sorry, I'm going to put that back. Whole, half, whole, 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 half, and whole. Now, moving on. The scale that starts on scale degree 3 is called Phrygian. Phrygian. It's an awkward looking word. Okay, but think of the word fridge. Like you go to your fridge to get a snack. Fridge is how you pronounce it. Phrygian. And in just the same way, I'm going to start here. Okay, so my intervals of whole and half steps will start with a half step. It's going to be half, whole, 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 half, whole, and this whole will get tacked on to the end. All right, so this is going to start with an H, half step, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Hopefully you can notice what's happening here is you see the half steps starting here and moving towards the front of the pattern. Starts here, moves towards the front. It's a visual sort of change. All right. Again, not that you have to memorize these patterns. What I think is more important is to remember that the Ionian scale is the major scale. Dorian is a scale starting on scale degree 2. Phrygian is a scale starting on scale degree 3, etc. Okay. The one starting on scale degree 4 is called, oops, I'll use my red pen again, is called Lydian, Lydian. Okay. It will have, again, just like everything else, okay, every other time, the first interval will get kicked to the end, and these ones will move to the left. Everything will move down to the left. So we're going to start with whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half. Okay, that's Lydian. And then the scale degree 5, the mode starting on scale degree 5 of the major scale, oops, not MO, is called Mixolydian. All right, Mixolydian starts on scale degree 5, and we're going to do the same thing. This guy comes and starts our pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. This is the one that will sound very much like a major scale, except for the very end. Notice how this pattern of whole and half steps is just like the Ionian, the major scale. Whole, whole, half, whole, whole, and it's just the very end that's different. Okay. After scale degree 5, we have scale degree 6, the mode that starts on scale degree 6, which is called Aeolian. This is just your basic minor scale, Aeolian. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. So whole, half, whole, whole, whole. Oops, sorry. A half step goes here, and whole, whole. Okay. Again, if you're looking at this as a top-down thing, you're seeing the H's slide to the left. The H's are moving all the way slowly towards the front. Okay. Okay. And then finally, the one that sounds the weirdest, the one that's built on scale degree 7, is called Locrian. Locrian. Okay, and to know the pattern that's there, again, move everything to the left. We start with a half step, whole, whole, half step, whole, whole, and whole. Okay. So again, guys, the half step patterns, you do not have to memorize these. I will never ask you to memorize these. Okay. What's more important is you understand that the different modes are really just variations and permutations of the major scale. Instead of starting on scale degree 1 of a key signature, we're starting on a different scale degree of a key signature. So, it says, write out the 7 modal scales starting on each of the white notes of the pianos beginning on C, label them with their modal name, and mark the half steps with slurs. Essentially what they're asking you to do here, guys, is to write out the scales that are printed up here. Okay, so C Ionian goes from C to C, D Dorian goes from D to D, E Phrygian goes from E to E, and all of these scales have an empty key signature. Okay, G Mixolydian goes from G to G, and it uses the key signature of C major. So all of these scales have an empty key signature. Now, if this seems like kind of easy right now, the big challenge will come when you have to start thinking in different key signatures for different kinds of scales, right? A D Dorian scale, for example, well, Dorian means 2, so this is scale degree 2 of a C major scale. These are all connected to the key signature of C major. But if I asked you for a different Dorian scale, if I asked you for, let's say, a G Dorian scale, well, then you have to think of the note G as scale degree 2 of what other key signature. And so you have to start thinking a little bit backwards in terms of, if this is scale degree 2, what is the key signature I need to use to figure out, right? So I figure out what notes I need to play. So that's where a little more of the advanced thinking comes in. But we're going to talk about that in subsequent lessons, okay? So for today, this lesson is just to familiarize yourself with the names of the modes, right? Then all these funky looking words, and starting to connect the names of the words with which scale degrees we're talking about. Okay? So scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, and 7. There you go. So 1 is Ionian, 2 is Dorian, 3 is Phrygian, etc. All the way down. That's the more important thing for you to start connecting in your head, is those words with those particular scale degrees. Okay, so that's a lot of info, I understand. Hopefully over the next few lessons in this unit, it'll start making more sense in terms of how we make use of these modes in different kinds of music. Okay, take care, guys. Have a good day, and we'll see you in the next lesson.